Cool. Thank you guys both for being here today. Thanks for everyone for joining us. We're talking about the future of money today. For a show of hands, of course, the future of money, you can't talk about it without talking about Bitcoin. Show of hands in the audience, who out there owns some Bitcoin or has owned Bitcoin? Okay, I see a few hands out there. The first question I'd like to ask you guys is Bitcoin adoption in Southeast Asia, particularly among merchants, which sort of drive adoption among the rest of the crowd. What are you seeing out there? Ron, let's start with you.
Sure. So we're seeing some good adoption. You're looking at Rakuten in Japan that's recently announced they're adding support. There is, I think, 3 of the top 5 merchants in the Philippines now have acceptance methods one way or another. Really, as a merchant, there is no reason not to do it, right? Most online merchants work on very thin margins, usually around 6%. And if you have to leave 2 to 3% of that on the table for MasterCard Visa, that's quite a painful thing to do. So adding another payment method is quite good. The real question is actually not merchant adoption, because for merchants it's a low cost decision. It's actually around consumer adoption, and I think that's a really exciting signal we're seeing is more and more products and more customers getting on wallets where they can actually transact with these merchants.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, so we've obviously for Braintree we put Coinbase as a way of utilizing Bitcoin Wallet or Bitcoin to really be there first for when something happens more to scale. But when we look at the feedback and we look at what we're seeing in the market, especially in this region, it feels like it's a really good way to move money between as a B2B capability. Look, we know that it's not only the Visa and MasterCard and say credit card costs that are there. Traditional banking costs are there as well for moving money, and that's why we've seen the rise of companies like OzForex and Forex trading companies, because people have a real need to move money between countries quite often, quite frequently. And I think for me, Bitcoin does have a capability there to do that at a low cost.
Okay, but obviously there's still a long ways to go before this becomes the norm, I suppose. So what are some of the big obstacles out there for Bitcoin companies and Bitcoin in general?
Yeah, I think there is an expectation that Bitcoin is going to become a currency, and I think that expectation is actually maybe somewhat false. I think the exciting part is actually the blockchain, is the ability for people. So for those who don't know, blockchain is the technology behind Bitcoin. And what blockchain allows people to do is to send value directly from one to another without the need for intermediaries. And so the exciting piece is that we can now exchange value between merchants and customers without going through a processor like Visa. Migrant workers can send money to each other without having to go through all the intermediaries that are traditionally there for correspondent banking. And I think what's going to drive adoption is really products that abstract the protocols and the technology and allow customers to actually deal with fiat. So if you look at, for example, our product today, it uses digital currency at the background, but the customers are actually not exposed to it. So they can send funds directly to each other over the blockchain.
Yeah, look, I think talking about adoption, if we look at traditional, the now traditional wallets, they've taken a long time to get to their position because it came down to user behavior and how we use it and when we use it. And for me, it's you'll get real adoption when you can start buying a cup of coffee, right? When you can get down to a daily transaction, that's when the use, when you can use it in that form, and then people take that up as a way of paying. You start seeing it used as a consumer behavior. But to the point of actually transferring and logging with blockchain, yeah, that to me is the probably hidden gem of the whole thing, is actually opening people up to the concept of being able to transfer without using what has been a traditional method.
Right. So you guys are sort of saying two different use cases. Do you see, Tyson, do you see Bitcoin being used as a currency in Southeast Asia? Can you foresee that?
Well, I think a way of making purchases, perhaps, yeah. Way of paying for goods and services, absolutely. I think the word currency is hard because I think, you know, you look at a Bitcoin, it's still tied to a currency value. So really, in many people's mind, it still has an event. You know, I think, you know, spoken to people and asked how many Bitcoins they have, the first answer is they'll tell you how much it is in currency. They won't actually know exactly how many Bitcoins they have exactly, but they'll know exactly what its value is. So then you ask the question, well, if you've done that, then really is Bitcoin the currency, or is it just a way of moving currency?
Right. Yeah, I see it more as a container for transferring value, right? So the majority of people, especially in emerging markets, can't really afford any exposure to volatility or risk with their money. They earn very little, and if you have 100 pesos or 10,000 rupiah in your pocket, you can't really afford for that to go down. And so I think the products that are going to win are ones that afford people the safety of hard currency, but then the benefits of Bitcoin and blockchain for the transfer of the funds. So reduced friction, lower cost, instant peer-to-peer transfers, etc.
Right. Okay. Do you guys see a point where, of course, in developing countries, which are many in Southeast Asia, many people have leapfrogged the PC era and gone straight to the smartphone. Tyson, we talked earlier about, you mentioned that the smartphone is tied very closely to the rise of Bitcoin. The growth of smartphones is tied to Bitcoin. Can you explain that a little bit further and what it means for especially unbanked people in Southeast Asia?
Yes, certainly. I mean, you've got your primary computing device is a mobile. It's with you all the time, and you can have a multiple of apps that represent any of your holdings, whether it be stocks, whether it be your banking, etc. That's, you know, developed. In the more developing countries, the real advantage is that you can actually, as long as there's a place to distribute or get that currency or value onto your phone, you now have the ability to transfer quickly and independently of using traditional systems. So I think there is a real opportunity in the developing countries, especially as the devices are smart enough, because they're not requiring, you know, very elegant apps being built by people and organizations to make it very easy to transfer. It really comes down to, if you look at even how people are topping up, you know, they top up their phones via voucher or via scratch card or whatever it is in their areas. It wouldn't be too hard to make that a leap into adding value for Bitcoin. And then, you know, as we've said, you've got a lot of unbanked, which means they do have some currency somewhere, and, you know, the security and risk is now in that currency being somewhere, and, you know, whatever could happen to that. So I think it really comes down to could it be designed that people could put that currency quickly into Bitcoin, getting in and out. I mean, we've seen examples of that, things like M-Pesa in Africa, which, you know, has the ability to make very quick transfers, but using domestic, you know, convenience store type for the purpose of loading and unloading that money.
I mean, so more people in the Philippines have Facebook accounts than bank accounts. Actually, significantly more people have Facebook accounts, right? It's only 2 out of 10 households that have deposit bank accounts, less than 5% of credit card penetration. So the model of reaching customers with a traditional brick and mortar bank has failed. And it's actually never going to work out because it's just too expensive. When you're trying to cater to a demographic that earns a few $100s a month and has almost no savings, your annual LTV for the customer is, you know, in single-digit dollars, right? So the first time they walk into the branch, the bank is already losing money. So this is why mobile makes a lot of sense, because mobile is really the only way to reach out to the demographic in a cost-efficient way. And that's really, and if you look at you know, where banking is going to evolve and where we're positioning ourselves is for driving financial services to this huge demographic that's unbanked at a lower cost.
Bitcoin isn't the only solution to these problems, however. In the Philippines particularly, there's things like V-Money, there are things like the e-Peso initiative, which is a government initiative to create sort of electronic currency. Are those helping or hurting? Are those helping or hurting, especially in the Philippines? I want to ask Ron this question because you would seem to be sort of competing with those initiatives.
Sure. So, I mean, our mission really is to increase financial inclusion and reach customers who are unbanked today. If it's Bitcoin, Ripple, ePeso, the protocol is actually not that important. Any type of initiative that helps us do that is actually supportive for our mission. In fact, I think if you look a year or 2 years down the line, the customers are not even going to know what the funds are getting transported on. So that's not so relevant as much as being able to solve a real problem for the customer.
And look, I'd see those initiatives as only being positive because they come down from the concept of education and inclusion. Even if we look at it even down to using mobile, people have been transferring minutes for a long time now in these countries. So it's they're being well trained. They've got the opportunity to know how quickly it is to go peer to peer for these transfers. The question will be going from peer to peer to business, and that's the leap. Peer to peer is something that we've been seeing in all markets at different versions. I think it now comes down to, can it be used for commerce, and does it become a real commerce initiative rather than just moving money between? Remittance isn't new, and if you look at even Singapore, the amount it's remitted to the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia on a weekly basis, there's certainly a lot going on there, and a lot of it's being notified and or distributed via mobile after it's been loaded.
Ron, I want to ask you, there are a lot of startups and other Bitcoin companies out there, or companies that operate on Bitcoin, sort of like yours, as a functional, based on the blockchain rather than an actual currency, and they're trying to almost hide the fact that they're using Bitcoin. Is that a good thing? Should they be taking Bitcoin out of the equation for the end customer as much as possible? I mean, that sort of lowers awareness of Bitcoin, but it helps spread the financial inclusion that you mentioned.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, customers, when they get up in the morning, our customers, they're not thinking, how do I get Bitcoin? They're thinking, how do I send money back home to my family? How do I pay a supplier? They're trying to get a utility out of the product. And I mean, much in the same way, when you're getting on Skype, you're not really thinking about TCP/IP or UDP or the underlying protocols. I don't think that the way that the funds get transferred is as important as the net outcome, which is lower fees.
Yeah, and look, I think it has to be tied to something. I think if there's any transfer of value, it has to be tied to a standard. Years gone by it was gold, then it moved on to government secured, and then no matter what we do, there's always got to be something that's tangible that we can go pull out and actually put in our hands and go use somewhere else. And I think using probably what is to the advantage of using, say, something like Bitcoin is for a startup or for new businesses, it's quite accessible. Whereas lines of credit, funding, I'm sure a lot of people here know about funding, to actually start something like a lot more difficult. Whereas if you want to create a trade, it's very easy to access Bitcoin, get in, get out, and have used that as a way of facilitating a transfer of funds.
So we talked about a few of the obstacles, speed being one of them, and efficiency, convenience, education. But one of the biggest obstacles out there is, of course, the elephant in the room is government regulation. So when it comes to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, how much time and resources do you guys spend navigating legal scenarios?
Well, I mean, for us, we have an absolute obligation to follow the banking systems, right? I mean, if you look at our company, we have, not only is there no choice, but it actually makes good fiduciary sense. And I think when it comes to utilising Bitcoin, of course, no one wants to be the person that funded something catastrophic. So I think that we've all got our own need to assure that we're doing something that's positive, that we're not making it really should be so people can buy a cup of coffee and or buy tickets for airline tickets or whatever they need to do. So that's what we're trying to achieve. However, you always have to be conscious that people use it for nefarious means, and so therefore you have to take a high ground on ensuring that you follow the regulation. The other part for us, probably more than anything, is that because we run across multi countries and jurisdictions, it's absolutely vital again. And I think the value that we give is actually for the merchants and the consumers that use our products, because we're taking that pain away. and that's why we spend the time and the effort on assuring that we meet and are compliant. If anything, try and actually even add some thought leadership to this, because it is there. It's not going away. So we might as well make sure that we, front foot of making sure it's a very legal and well regulated. Like most things, if you don't have regulation and it grows, someone will want to regulate it. So it always helps to do the right thing from the start.
So we spend a lot of time on regulatory coverage. So AML, KYC. Even though, I mean, actually the hard part is that there's no clear standards right now. And I think a lot of people, I have this conversation quite frequently, and people ask me, "Oh, this is great. You're not regulated. You can operate freely." Actually, I think one of the biggest inhibitors for growth of Bitcoin and blockchain technology is the lack of regulation. Having a clear regulatory framework means that you can build trusted companies, you give customers the assurances that their funds are protected, that people are operating within a certain level of standards. So I think the landscape for that is going to change quickly over the next probably 24 months, and I think it's going to be something that's really going to help the entire industry mature.
How do you build, even if the regulations go your way, how do you build trust? Because that's another huge obstacle for Bitcoin. Usually, if you go to a bank and you deposit funds, those banks insure your funds. So when it comes to leapfrogging the traditional banking system and going straight to Bitcoin, which I think would, overall benefit a lot of people, especially unbanked people in these developing countries. How do you earn their trust first?
Well, I think that's probably the bigger of the questions that come with the education, because the way you build trust is by making sure that time and time again that it's assured, and that whatever you do, if I make a purchase or I make a transfer, that it certainly goes, and the reverse is if I receive it, that it actually executes to something that's tangible that I can use. And I probably, we probably see that when it comes to any sort of trust issue, it comes down to, one, that there is support. And actually, if anything, regulation adds to trust. Having government and or banking intervention or involvement as such, probably more than intervention, if we move on to involvement, it actually means people are assured that if they've gone through the transfer, it's there. And I think to your point around, I don't think that the Bitcoin or the way the blockchain's working is exactly avoiding traditional banking. I think what it's doing is it's a certain part of it that it's speeding up and changing the process. And if anything, I'd suggest financial institutions are looking at it going, well, it's actually efficient. And the current systems aren't. And if you haven't got an efficient system, it's costing you more. So I think what they're learning from it is that it's a great way for themselves to run a more efficient system. And like a lot of startups, it's usually about, and new things, it's about a better way to an old solution or problem. So it's fixing a problem. And I think that's where you can actually start building trust as well. When people see that what it achieves helps from what it was in the past.
Yeah, I mean, nothing is really changing. We're just moving from a system where each bank holds its own ledger and database to a decentralized, one single database, which just makes it much easier for people to connect directly. The endpoints look the same. Funds need to be secured the same way. Entities that are providing financial services need to have the same type of integrity they had before and build the same type of trust with their customers. And you build that trust by compliance. You build it by providing excellent customer service. We know we're only as good as our last transaction, and our customers, that work with us, they know how well we performed with them over the past, X month, and this is what really builds trust, is performance.
Okay. I want to ask you guys about a tipping point, if there is one. Obviously, there's basically two different use cases we're talking about. One is sort of a financial service when it comes to remittances, to moving money, B2B or otherwise. Is there a tipping point when when Bitcoin will become the norm, and how far out do you think that tipping point is?
Well, yeah, it's a long question for the room. I think when it comes again, it comes back to trust as well. I think when you see it on with more traditional providers using it, then there's an obvious gain there. When you can see it in more day-to-day transactions, that of course will help with the tipping point. I think there's a part where the question will be more: is it Bitcoin itself that is the product that wins, or is it the next generation that comes out that is more agreed by others, or whether that be governments or banking? But tipping points always come with velocity, and you need velocity. You need to have everyday transactions of all values across both business to business and business to consumer to get there. I mean, the credit card got there. I mean, if you look at the evolution of the credit card, it started as a real business to business product 100 years ago, and now it is using it to tap and go for your fast food and or coffee in the morning. So, the concept that you now put your $4 or $3 of coffee on a credit card seems quite extreme, but it's the velocity that it got to, the natural velocity. And again, if you could do the same with Bitcoin, then you've hit your tipping point.
So can you say 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Is that predictable? I mean, can you give me a range?
To me, it would be when you see any of the major retailers and or marketplaces offering it as a way to pay for goods and services. That'll be the first sign. Now, if that happened tomorrow, the tipping point's coming sooner. If it takes 2 years, that tipping point's going to be X period on. And I think that to me is, we see with the advent of wallets, I mean, again, if wallets can take it and store it and keep it and transfer it, then that tipping point comes sooner. It's very hard to say because it's still not accessible to all. Sometimes it's not as easy to get hold of as depending on which country you come from. And I've spoken to people who, if you're living between countries, sometimes it's difficult to get hold of. So it comes down to distribution or the ability to load a wallet to use it, right? So when that's easy, then the next comes. But hard to pick a line in the sand of when that tipping point is.
Ron?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that assessment. I think it's going to be succession of tipping points, right? Of milestones that need to be reached, right? I mean, we already are seeing some pretty big merchants in the U.S. Doing acceptance, like Expedia, Dell, Microsoft, etc. I think banks have to come on board. I think having a certain percentage of the population who's already using it to transact peer-to-peer, people are doing remittances. It's going to be a road versus a single inflection.
Okay. In you guys' view, when it comes to spreading Bitcoin and getting it more into mainstream society, there are a lot of problems, as we discussed, but the best people to solve those problems are startups. So what are some of the startups that you'd like to see fill those gaps? What are the gaps that need to be filled that startups could do?
Yeah, look, to me it's startups might be in either remittance, the wallet, the ability to transfer in and out of funds, even those that are willing to take the risk, as it were, on facilitating real-time purchasing, so you can, buy goods and services, and especially services potentially that make it easy, because then you get in and out of that holding very quickly. I think but it's got to be around the mainstream. I think we need startups that start looking at using it for a particular good, right? Find a problem that needs solving, and I think again we've spoken about emerging markets where there's unbanked. I think that there's a great opportunity there because it is tied to a known currency. There are people that don't have access and or are comfortable using traditional banking. Maybe that's where their fear is. And those who are willing to have this mobile first mentality, because it is about seeing it, knowing it, and utilizing it. So I also like to see startups that think about it as either a very micro capability, whether it be just in some form of micro community where it works really well, and or the reverse being that it's a globalized product. Because I think there's a use case for everything, right? I mean, we've recently seen natural disasters where it could just as be easy used for distribution than traditional, because you could actually get it to the end source quicker, right? Because it is so instantaneous. As long as you've got the A party and the B party, you can distribute. So I think finding good cause projects as well will also help the use of that distribution. So anyone that's out there growing user bases and probably more importantly educating that base to use are going to be the startups that will add value to Bitcoin and other currencies that come like that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, maybe one of the most exciting things about the blockchain is that it opens up the room for people who could not innovate before in fintech. So it really levels the playing field. Anyone can really become a participant and offer services. And so that on its own is an innovation driver. If you look across Southeast Asia, a lot of the existing infrastructure is pretty far behind. So there are a lot of opportunities to insert technology and leapfrog the existing systems, even the ones that are out in the U.S. or in Europe. I think if you look at everything from, if you look at smart contracts, everything from shipping contracts to land registration to company registration to back-end banking services like credit swaps, etc. All that stuff can be improved using decentralized systems. So there's tons and tons of stuff to do.
Is there a point where it's not helpful to integrate Bitcoin into your business? Tyson, we talked yesterday a little bit about gimmicks or using Bitcoin as basically a punchline to gain media attention. A lot of companies, startups or big companies or whatever, will say, oh, we accept Bitcoin now, knowing that they're probably not going to get any of their transactions Bitcoin, but they will get media attention from Bitcoin publications. Is that hurting or helping?
Well, like all for want of a better term, stunts and or announcements, if it's not real and not followed up, then it can hurt. But anything that makes people aware is good, for potentially for Bitcoin. But probably to the same point when we are looking at education, I think as we were speaking yesterday, that the education is very difficult because there's no real association around Bitcoin to talk about it and to promote it. Like traditional banking has that. There are big marketing budgets and it works. So it's very easy to talk about. So I think that's the unfortunate part that I say that if they're really about doing something positive, they would actually take the other forms of payment off. But if they do make a comment around accepting it, it's also is a great thing. So I think you've got to look at these things in the way that they add value. Should always be around the education. So I think it's in the best interest to always make sure it's a positive and it leaves people with a really good taste in their mouth about trying a new form of payment.
Ron?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at us as a company, we've actually been pretty lean on media in general because we really believe in just building a service that's valuable, right? And so most of our growth is coming from customers who figured out that they can save the 8% that they're paying today to send money back home, for example. And when you have that, the stories come out. They tell their friends come, they use their product. And I think that's what's going to drive the growth. Is not really PR or marketing, but rather real use cases.
So going back to my point about tipping points, we talked about the biggest Bitcoin markets in the world right now is probably the US, correct? So because Bitcoin has such potential to help the unbanked and developing countries, do you foresee Bitcoin being an even bigger network, having more use in these developing countries than the U.S.? Do you see it these developing countries surpassing the U.S. in Bitcoin use in the future?
100% yes. So 2 years ago, I remember spending some time in Myanmar when they're just kind of opening up their cell phone infrastructure, and seeing people actually search on Facebook instead of Google, right? And I think it's kind of the same outlook right now in Philippines, Indonesia, and those countries. We're looking at customers that just don't have anything else other than these online wallets to send and receive money. And these are working people, or freelancers, outsourced like BPO employees, etc. And they're not gonna. This generation is not gonna stop for the bank. They're gonna go like one level, one level ahead.
Yeah, look, I absolutely see there's a great opportunity for it to add more significant value in a market that doesn't have certain things. So I think that'd be great to see. Whether or not it happens or not, that's a different thing, but it would be great to see that it's utilised for a real good need of helping others, get involved in e-commerce and next generation commerce.
Great. We are out of time, so let's wrap it up there. Please join me in thanking our guests.